Good afternoon. I would like to share a few thoughts with you about Russian scouting, both in Russia and in the diaspora in Russia abroad. I believe that Russian scouting played a major role in preserving Russian self-identification among the émigré youth in Russia abroad. By Russia abroad, I mean that vast imaginary community or project dedicated to maintaining a Russian cultural and political alternative to the USSR, formed as the result of the flight of several million people between 1920 and 1945 from Russia and later the Soviet Union to various points of the globe. Russian scouting was an integral part of this project. And along with the Orthodox Church, it is one of the oldest and most robust organizations in the Russian émigré community. It has institutional continuity reaching back to its roots in Imperial Russia. Founded in St. Petersburg in 1909, and actually before the Boy Scouts in the United States, it continued down to the present in summer camps, winter meetings in Europe, North and South America, Australia, and after 1990 in Russia itself. Paradoxically, both before 1917 and afterwards in exile, Russian scouting in many ways was an exception to the commonly held perception of Russia as a conservative, pre-modern society with a dearth of democratic or liberal tendencies and institutions, and anti-individualistic bias. By briefly looking at some of the most well-known personages who supported scouting in Russia, I hope to add balance to this somewhat simplistic approach to the Russian past. And here, in this slide, what we see is a postcard that was published in 1916. It is a good illustration of the democratic direction or tendency in Russian scouting. The scout is urged to be prepared to help the weak. And the Boy Scout is helping an old lady, but she's not from the urban elite, the prime supporters of scouting, but rather from the lower classes. You can tell this by her dress and by the fact that she was gathering firewood as fuel for her stove. From its original foundation, Russian scouting was a liberal organization, but liberal in a quintessentially Russian way. The founder of Russian scouting was not focused on political questions of private property or free markets. Oleg Ivanovich Pantukhoff stated from the very beginning that his organization's main goal was to develop each child's personhood, individuality, or lichnost in Russian. Lichnost, this term in Russian carries an almost ontological dimension, since linguistically it is connected to the sacred concept of lik, a term which the Orthodox use to reference the faces of images of icons. Everything else, according to Pantukhoff, camaraderie, esprit de corps, love of country, love of nature, service to community, all of this would flow out of this individual personal development connected to lichnost. Long ago in Pavlovsk Park, the kids went on a hike, and there they lit a bonfire bright for the scouts of the Russian land. This song was sung at most Russian scout campfires for the last 70 years, so that Pavlovsk, whose photograph we see right here, is definitely part of the imaginary landscape of every Russian scout, no matter where they lived. So let me take you back to a sunny day in 1909, when modernity shattered the melancholy reverie of Pavlovsk Park. Pavlovsk and the neighboring Tsarskoye Selo were the sites of several royal palaces and guards regiments. In short, two fashionable suburbs of St. Petersburg, separated by a beautiful park landscaped in the Romantic English style, as we can see right here. Oops, sorry. The uniformed officers and ladies sedately strolling among its romantic groves or gazing pensively into the meandering Slavyanka River right here were startled to see a single file of boys dressed in khaki with wide-brimmed ranger hats jogging under the avenue of ancient birch trees, which runs through the park center. Various gymnastic exercises, handstands, pyramids disturbed the green tranquility of the meadow, stretching out before the Temple of Friendship, a pavilion from the time of Paul I. At the head of this odd group was Staff Captain Oleg Ivanovich Pantukhoff, a guards officer from the Tsarskoye Selo Rifle Guards Regiment, stationed in the neighboring town. Pantukhoff was an enthusiastic proponent of Sir Robert Baden-Powell's innovative method for educating youth outside the confines of school and home. Pantukhoff had recently read the Russian language version of Baden-Powell's book, Scouting for Boys, and then had discussed it in great detail with Emperor Nicholas II in the informal setting of a regimental dinner. One of the perks of serving in the guards was this easy contact with the male members of the royal family, all of whom, as a matter of course, had to spend some time in the military. Nicholas II himself was a fan of Baden-Powell's method, and having read the book in the original English, ordered its subsequent translations into Russian. Okay, here is a photo of Oleg Ivanovich in his parade uniform from 1914, an early edition of Scouting for Boys in the Russian translation. Here we see Baden-Powell, Юный разведчик, перевод с английского, translation from the English, Scouting for Boys. And we also see a postcard with the image of Baden-Powell. This postcard is commemorating the Boer War from 1900. And here we see the imperial underpinnings of the English scouting idea rather clearly emerge. Here in the cartouche, it says, either conquer or die, a rather bellicose sentiment. And here is the point when we come to the first paradox of Russian scouting. If in the Anglo-Saxon world, scouting has traditionally been associated with conservative values and politics, this was far from the case in Russia. In contrast to the stated aim of Sir Baden-Powell, which was to, quote, mold trustworthy sons of empire from the lower and middle classes of a Britain destabilized, in his opinion, by wealth and the expansion of the franchise. Russian scouting was perceived to be a liberal, almost a revolutionary endeavor in the Russian society of its time, in those last waning days of Imperial Russia. The difference in the two men's approaches to scouting becomes apparent from Pantukhoff's description of their first meeting in St. Petersburg in 1910, when Baden-Powell came to Russia. Pantukhoff was making small talk concerning his recent trip to Italy and his impressions of British tourists who reminded him of ancient Romans. What do you mean, ancient Romans? Do you mean Rome just before the fall? Bristled Baden-Powell. And then came a tirade against the selfishness and weakness of the British and how his scouting organization was an antidote to the decadence which he perceived to be rife in the British Empire. Pantukhoff's purposes were very different. in quite consciously creating an organization for boys, and after 1916, girls as well, which cut across religious and class lines, and in setting the goal of developing individual personhood or lichnost, he was hoping to help mold modern individuals for the benefit of a modernizing Russian society as a whole. For example, Pantukhoff began the custom of Russian scouts addressing all members of the organization, from the oldest and highest ranked to the youngest and least experienced, with the informal Russian second person pronoun ty, or you, rather than the formal vy, emphasizing the brotherhood underlining his organization. This was quite an innovation in a hierarchical society still legally divided by estates such as noble, merchant, peasant, etc. The first Tsarsko-Selsky scout troop included, among other boys, the 13-year-old Prince Georgy Konstantinovich, son of Grand Duke Konstantin Konstantinovich Romanov, and who was second cousin once removed to Nicholas II. Also in the troop was the 15-year-old boy of Jewish origin, Nikolai Aduyev Rabinovich, who, while still a teenager, wrote the words to the Russian Scout anthem, which is sung at every campfire down to the present day. Будь готов, разведчик, делу честному. Be prepared, scout, for honorable deeds. The fact that Aduyev Rabinovich also attended the same progressive private high school as Nabokov, the future author and the son of Vladimir Dmitrovich Nabokov, one of the founders of the Constitutional Democratic Party, the Cadets, one of the most liberal parties in the Russian parliament before the revolution, further underscores the liberal direction of the network, which was crystallizing around Pantukhoff scouts at this time. Here we see the young Vladimir Nabokov, the future author, with his father, Vladimir Dmitrovich Nabokov, one of the preeminent liberals in the Russian parliament, in Russia's first experiment with constitutionalism after 1905. Here again, we see Nabokov, his mother and younger brothers and sisters. The reason why I am emphasizing Nabokov is my own interest in the connection between liberalism and Russian scouting was first sparked while reading the English language translation of Vladimir Nabokov's 1932 novel. The novel was called Podvig in Russian and Glory in the translation. Looking through the author's preface in the English version, I was struck by the way Nabokov draws attention of the reader to the role played by liberal politics in the life of his young protagonist, Martin Edelweiss. This digression is missing in the Russian original because, and I quote Nabokov, American intellectuals have been conditioned by Bolshevik propaganda into early disregarding the vigorous existence of liberal thought among Russian expatriates. In the original 1932 version of the novel, there is no need for such a foreword. The liberal proclivities of Martin and his family are obvious to the Russian emigre reader from the clues scattered throughout the text, among which is a reference to scouting in the initial description of Sofia Edelweiss, Martin's mother. And I quote, "In St. Petersburg, she was known as an Anglomaniac and relished this fame. She could discuss eloquently such topics as Boy Scouts or Kipling and found a quite special delight in frequent visits to Drew's English shop." Surely Nabokov, the author, knew what was liberal in both pre-revolutionary Russia and Russia abroad, And knowing this, used scouting as a marker for this worldview in his protagonist. Okay. Before turning our attention to Oleg Ivanovich Pantukhoff himself, let us take a very brief look at the adults who supported the first steps of Russian scouting by directly helping Pantukhoff in his work with the Scouts or through joining the Society of Supporters of Young Scouts, which after 1914 had branches in both St. Petersburg and Moscow, or simply by allowing their children to become Scouts, since a parental agreement letter was required to join. Some very interesting and highly placed people in the Russian Empire were early supporters of Scouting. Emperor Nicholas II himself, Ippolit Tchaikovsky, Vice Admiral and brother of the famous composer, Tchaikovsky's muse and financial supporter Nadezhda von Meck and her son and grandson, Grand Duchess Elizaveta Fyodorovna, Erast Platonovich Tsitovich, the royal tutor, who we will look at in greater detail in a little bit. Basically, many very interesting people were interested in scouting before the revolution. Okay, so here at the center of, and at the center of this whole network, sorry, I just want to make sure, stands Grand Duke Konstantin Konstantinovich Romanov. Konstantin Konstantinovich Romanov was poet, dreamer, patron of the arts, but also the royal inspector of all military schools in the Russian Empire, president of the Russian Musical and Fine Arts Society, of the Academy of Sciences, and devoted father of 9 children. K.R., his pseudonym or nom de plume, under which he published several books of poetry and plays, was the second cousin once removed of Nicholas II, and the father of the only 2 royal children active in scouting, Prince Georgy Konstantinovich, and outside of Russia already, Princess Vera Konstantinovna. Okay, and here we see Prince Georgy right here in 1915. At the time he joined the Tsarsko-Selsky scout troop. By his side is his younger sister, Vera Konstantinovna, passionately interested in scouting already, but formally joining the movement only as an adult in exile. And here, the littlest figure in this family photo of Konstantin Konstantinovich and his wife, Elizaveta Mavrikyevna, is Georgy, again, here as a 3-year-old. And he's photographed dressed in the androgynous toddler wear, as was the custom before World War I among upper and middle class families. And here again is a great photo of Konstantin Konstantinovich Romanov with Georgy, who at that time was his youngest child. And poor Georgy looks very confused. Maybe it has something to do with his androgynous outfit. Again, the little dress, but then the pants also there. Okay, so I'd like to now read something that I found in Pantukhoff's memoir, O Dniach Былых, where he cites a 1932 letter from Prince Georgy as an adult, in which Georgy recounts his scouting experiences. Quote, "I am proud of the fact that I was the first member of the royal family to enter the glorious ranks of the Russian Scout Pathfinders and to go on hikes beneath our banner of St. George. The heir apparent, Tsarevich Alexei, followed me into the ranks of Russian Scouts. When he heard all the captivating details about our free and easy life beneath the open sky, about our hikes and camping, from my mother, Grand Duchess Elizaveta Mavrikyevna, the heir apparent expressed a desire to become a scout, and our sovereign, the emperor, enrolled him in the Tsarskoye Selo troop. And here we see a photo of Vera Konstantinovna Romanova, but this is already in 1956, when she joined the scouting organization already as a refugee in exile. And I found a note from her in the archive of Pantukhoff, of Oleg Ivanovich Pantukhoff, and this is what she wrote. When Colonel Oleg Pantukhoff organized scouting in Tsarskoye Selo, when Colonel Oleg Pantukhoff organized scouting in Tsarskoye Selo, the heir apparent was enrolled in that troop, while my brother, Georgy, 3 years my senior, was also a scout in the same Tsarskoye Selo troop. Of course, understandably, I also passionately wanted to be a Girl Scout, but my parents forbade it. I was consoled with a scout uniform, which I proceeded to wear with pleasure. I had shoulder straps with the initials CS on them, Tsarskoye Selo. My brother ordered me to take off those initials, and I believe he also confiscated my whistle, since I was not a real Girl Scout, according to him. After leaving Russia, I visited the Vitezi, the Eagle Scouts of Captain Slipan near Berlin in the 1930s. I went to the Fischbeck camp for displaced persons near Hamburg and also visited some scouts after World War II. Here in America, I was a member of the NOR, the National Organization of Russian Pathfinders. I attended their festivities, parades. I had a scout uniform with the two-headed eagle on the shoulder straps, on my shoulder straps. So here she is in 1956 in Jackson, New Jersey, dressed in her scout uniform. Another note, the heir apparent that both Vera Konstantinovna and Georgy Konstantinovich were talking about Tsarevich Alexei, while officially enrolled in the Scouts at Tsarskoye Selo in 1916, never actually actively participated in the activities of the Scout troop due to his ill health. Okay, and here I would like to turn your attention to an important link tying the royal children to scouting in Tsarskoye Selo, and this was Erast Platonovich Tsitovich. He was the director of the Science and Technology High School, the Realное училище in Tsarskoye Selo, and the mathematics and physics tutor to the elder two sisters of Tsarevich Alexei, of the heir apparent, Grand Duchesses Olga and Tatiana, as well as to the three older children of Konstantin Konstantinovich Romanov. He tutored the heir to the throne, Alexei, in mathematics and science. Tsitovich was a member of the Society for the Support of Scouts in St. Petersburg and became the scout leader of Tsarskoye Selo, Pavlovsk scout troop, in 1915, when Pantukhoff himself left for the front during World War I. And it was, of course, at this time that Tsarevich Alexei officially joined the Tsarsko-Selsky troop. And here is a slide showing all of the royal children who studied with Tsitovich. Thus, again, as I repeat, providing the link between Tsitovich and the Tsarsko-Selsky scout troops. So Alexei Nikolaevich, the heir to the Imperial Russian throne, was officially a scout and interested in scouting, even if not participating in the actual physical activities. Princes Oleg and Igor and Princess Tatiana Konstantinovichi all also attended lectures by Tsitovich in science and physics. And the two elder Grand Duchesses, the elder sisters of Alexei, Olga and Tatiana, were also part of this group that would listen to lectures at the science, private lectures at the science high school. And one more interesting detail, the two elder Grand Duchesses, as well as the children of Konstantin Konstantinovich, used to ride horseback to their lessons from Pavlovsk to Tsarskoye Selo through the park. And this is another detail concerning the informality of life around Pavlovsk, which was so enchanting and was felt by all and often noted by Oleg Ivanovich Pantukhoff in his notes. Okay, tragically, all of the children of Nicholas II and three of the Grand Duke Konstantin Konstantinovich's sons were murdered by the Bolsheviks in 1918, along with Grand Duchess Elizaveta Fyodorovna. On a final note concerning Alexei, I wanted to share this icon of Alexei as a scout. A number of these icons started appearing in Russia after the canonization of the royal martyrs in 2000. So you can see here Alexei in the scout uniform. Also, I came across a Russian language edition of Scouting for Boys in a beautiful white leather bound with green trim book with Tsarevich Alexei's Ex Libris in the front cover in the Library of Congress in the Rare Books division. The book looked brand new and did not seem to have ever been read. However, it does show at least the pro forma interest in scouting at the highest levels of Russian society. The enthusiasm originally shown by Nicholas II for Baden-Powell scouting when he discussed it with Pantukhoff back in 1909, eventually cooled off. However, other royals were found to support the scouting movement in Russia. Chief among them was the widowed Grand Duchess Elizaveta Fyodorovna, who was the sister of Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna, the sister-in-law of Emperor Nicholas II, and who became the royal patron of all the scouts in Moscow. Okay, and here, this is in the days before widowhood, obviously, is a picture of Ella, as she was known to her family, Grand Duchess Elizaveta Fyodorovna, and she had a very special and close relationship with Konstantin Konstantinovich Romanov and with all of his children. And here is a little poem that Konstantin Konstantinovich Romanov wrote in honor of Ella, and I will read you the English translation, rough translation by me. I gaze at you, O beauteous vision. Your beauty stands beyond mere words. Surely beneath such a magnificent facade, the soul must also be as beautiful, full of a kind of meek and sacred melancholy which lies hidden in the profound depths of your eyes. You are as quiet, as pure, as perfect as an angel. As a woman, you are shy and full of tenderness. Let nothing on this sinful earth stain your purity, so that anyone who sees you will praise God who could create such beauty. After the assassination of Ella's husband, of Elizaveta Fyodorovna's husband, Elizaveta Fyodorovna left court life for a religious vocation and founded the Martha Mary Convent in Moscow. To find out more about the fascinating topic of Elizaveta Fyodorovna's convent, I suggest that you access the lecture of Dr. Louise Hardiman, which may be found online in the archives of the Russian History Museum. I would just like to point out that Elizaveta Fyodorovna's insistence on the active participation of her nuns in the street life of the Moscow slums, the fact that all members of the community had to be trained as bona fide nurses, Elizaveta Fyodorovna's interest in bringing back, her interest in the reinstatement of the clerical rank of deaconesses as practiced in the early Christian church all point to a modern sensibility or worldview. Her interest in scouting, her patronage of the scouts in Moscow, as well as her organization of a series of first aid courses for the elder scouts who were actively involved in helping hospital trains unload and sort out the wounded coming back from the war, from the front during World War I, further underscores this point. Religious services commemorating the start of the school year were served specifically for the Moscow Scouts in the Martha Mary Convent. In 1915, the year of the first aid courses began, and in 1916. Finally, Elizaveta Fyodorovna's resistance to the influence of Rasputin on her younger sister, Empress Alexandra, and the subsequent cooling of their relationship all speaks to the somewhat liberal bent of her worldview and seems to coincide with her interest in Russian scouting as a progressive organization. I have examined the will of Elizaveta Fyodorovna in the state archives in St. Petersburg, hoping to find that she had left some money to Pantukhoff and his organization, but unfortunately, Pantukhoff Scouting were not mentioned as beneficiaries. Okay, and here we see a fresco from the main church of the Martha Mary Convent, and as you can see here, foregrounded in the front here of this image of Holy Russia coming to Christ to get his blessing, are two children of scout age, an institutka and a cadet, which again underscores Grand Duchess Elizaveta Fyodorovna's interest in this particular age group, since the Grand Duchess had a very hands-on relationship to the architects and the artists who built and decorated her convent. Okay, and here we see Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, the composer, and his muse and main financial supporter, Nadezhda Filaretovna von Meck. And they also were linked to scouting through their friendship with Konstantin Konstantinovich Romanov. Konstantin Konstantinovich Romanov was also chairman of the Russian Musical Society and a close personal friend of the composer Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, who wrote the music for several of KR's art songs. Through this friendship, the interests of Konstantin Konstantinovich's family in the scouting movement spread to the family of Tchaikovsky. The composer's brother, Vice Admiral Ippolit Tchaikovsky, was the chairman of the Moscow branch of the supporters of young scouts, while the son and grandson of Nadezhda von Meck, the widow of the railroad tycoon, were also very active in the Moscow branch of the Society for the Support of Young Scouts. Vladimir von Meck, incidentally himself the secretary of Grand Duchess Elizaveta Fyodorovna, was one of the early organizers of the actual Boy Scout, Boy Scout troop in Moscow, while Nicholas von Meck sat on the executive committee for the Moscow branch of supporters of young Russian scouts. Okay, and here finally, this is a painting by the well-known Russian painter Nikolai Rurikh, foreign merchants, Zamorsky Gosti. Rurich's son, Yuri, became a member of the Petersburg Scout troop in 1916, and Rurikh was acquainted both with Konstantin Konstantinovich and with Nina Pantukhova, who was an artist in her own right, as well as being the wife of Oleg Ivanovich Pantukhoff. Scouting's link with the military, it was not in doubt. It is beyond question. Staff Captain Oleg Ivanovich Pantukhoff founded the Russian Scouting Organization. Many of the earliest scoutmasters were junior officers in the Imperial Guards or instructors from various military schools. The earliest editions of Baden-Powell's Scouting Handbook were translated by the General Staff upon the orders of Nicholas II and published by the Berezovsky Publishing House, which specialized in military literature. In addition to Drew's English shop, the Guards Equipment and Supply Store in Nevsky Prospect carried scouting uniforms. Pantukhoff himself, however, foregrounds scouting's non-military image. His description of an official inspection of Emperor Nicholas II of children's sports organizations in 1911 is characteristic of this attitude. And I quote, "My small troop of Tsarskoye Selo scouts," and here they are, and in fact, here is Pantukhoff, the tall man, they're standing right here, stood out distinctly during the inspection. Many illustrated magazines carried photographs of our scouts, and many newspapers wrote about them with particular warmth. The scouts evoked surprise and attention with their original uniforms, and most importantly, through their unsoldierly appearance against a background of boys dressed in military uniforms. Okay, and so who were these boys dressed in military uniforms? Here we are. They were officially called His Majesty's, the Heir Apparent's Grand Duke Alexei Nikolaevich's first national class of military drill and gymnastics, a military drilling society for boys founded by Antioch Lutskevich in response to the Tsar's direct request in 1908. This organization's official title was soon replaced in the press and in the popular usage by the term Petieshny, in reference to the play regiments organized by Tsar Peter I when he was a teenager back at the end of the 17th century. For Pantukhoff, the Petieshny were the counterfoil to scouting, everything that a children's organization ought not to be. The following is Pantukhoff's initial account of the Petieshny. Quote, Lutskevich gathered a large group of schoolboys together, gave them wooden rifles, a drum, and a brass band. Then they began to, quote, playing soldier in earnest. Alas, outside the polish of parade ground training, the Petieshny gained next to nothing. And indeed, what did the master sergeants and non-commissioned officers put in charge of the boys have to offer them? Pantukhoff's references to the Petieshny were usually accompanied by the trope, the powers that be, signifying officials who supported the Petieshny instead of the scouts. Thus, an aura of martinetish drill organized by self-serving state bureaucracies and bureaucrats, underscored by a sardonic subtext of wordplay stemming from the implied lack of true petiecha being fun in Russian, in the inauthentic Petieshny, imbues Pantukhoff's description of this rival organization with an air of patronizing disdain. And here's a close-up of the scout uniform in 1911 that was designed by Pantukhoff and his wife, Nina Mikhailovna. Thus, scouting is the antidote to the grim and inauthentic game organized by the authorities under the rubric of Petieshny. So, if it was not in his professional life in the Russian Imperial Army that Pantukhoff found inspiration for his scouting activities, where did this inspiration come from? Pantukhoff attributed it partially to his childhood in what he calls Tiflis. Now we call it Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia. Quote, I remembered again and again the happy times that we had during our mountain excursions in Tiflis with our Pushkinsky club, and I was inspired to start working with youngsters again. And here is actually, I went to Tbilisi 7 years ago, and my husband and I took photos of the places that Pantukhoff mentions in his book, O Dniach Былых, in his memoir. So here is the street where the Pantukhoffs rented a house for 10 years in Tbilisi. Here is the church, the Ascension Church that was located across the street from their house. And here is a hike that Pantukhoff and his 4 brothers with their father often took across the Salakali hill past the medieval castle and the botanical gardens during their stay in Tbilisi. Pantukhoff spent 10 years of his childhood in Tbilisi, where he finished the Tiflis Cadet Corps before going on to officer training in St. Petersburg. His father, Oleg Ivanovich Pantukhoff, was an army doctor, an officer, an anthropologist, and author. Oleg and his 4 brothers often accompanied their father into the mountains on anthropological research expeditions. They also organized the hiking club, the Pushkin Club, and during summer breaks would go on serious hikes of 70 to 100 kilometers for several weeks at a time, camping in the mountains. Pantukhoff always recalled this childhood as an idyllic time in his memoir of Dniach Былых, of bygone days. Pantukhoff concludes his reminiscences concerning the founding of the Boy Scouts in Russia by quoting a fireside chat which he composed entitled, "Every boy in his heart is already a scout." In it, Pantukhoff connects scouting directly with his own adventures as a boy in exploring the Caucasus Mountains with his brothers and his classmates. The subliminal elision from scouting to childhood appears through the use of the scouting term patrol, zveno, in his first mention of the hiking club in Tbilisi. The chat ends with the following sentiments. Baden-Powell's idea is as old as the world, and we followed in his footsteps. He was right when he said that boys should lead boys. Adults should help, but not lead. When all is said and done, we brought ourselves up. В конце концов, мы воспитывались сами. We were inspired by a youthful and noble passion, courage, the impulse towards something higher, towards freedom and discovery. So it was in our Pushkinsky club in Tbilisi and later in our Tsarskoye Selo patrols. Pantukhoff introduces his memoir with the epigraph, "A beautiful and sacred memory preserved from childhood may often serve as the best guarantee for becoming a good person as an adult." When read in combination with the fireside chats quoted above, the key to deciphering Pantukhoff's paradoxical anti-militarism and his antipathy to the Poteshny appears. The epigraph represents an example of the romantic attitude towards childhood, in which the child is father to the man. And a true lichnost can only be created by each free individual himself, one decision at a time. Thus, it is necessary to start educating oneself independently and freely in childhood. В конце концов, мы воспитались сами. And scouting provides the opportunity for just such an experience. Pantukhoff returned to St. Petersburg from the front in 1916. He was wounded and awarded with the Georgievsky Krest, the St. George Medal for Valor. You can see it here. Shortly afterwards, the revolution and the Bolshevik coup occurred, and Oleg Ivanovich Pantukhoff joined the White Army. Here we see a sketch we see his portrait, a sketch of Oleg Ivanovich in his uniform as Russia's first scout, as the leader, official leader of the Russian scout movement, to which he was elected during the White Army's retreat in Yekaterinodar in southern Russia in 1920. This thoughtful image, with its depiction of the toll taken by the years of war and civil strife, the face is thinner, the fold over the nose deeper, the mouth pressed into a straight line by sheer willpower, was the work of his loving wife and companion in scouting, Nina Mikhailovna Pantukhova, born Dobrovolskaya. The scout seal of the young scout sitting under the tree of life with the slogan, "Be prepared, будь готов," was also her work, as were many of the original scout symbols. Nina Mikhailovna was an accomplished professional artist whose skills would support her family, 2 sons and husband, once they emigrated to New York in 1921. Okay, and now we come to scouting in exile. The forced emigration of Pantukhoff and his family, along with hundreds of thousands of other Russians, as the result of being on the losing side of the Russian Civil War, marked a sea change in his attitude towards Russian scouting. Okay, here we see General Wrangel, the last commander-in-chief of the anti-Bolshevik forces in European Russia, who organized the brilliant evacuation of more than 150,000 men, women, and children from Crimea to Istanbul, which occurred after the final defeat of the White Army in Europe in November of 1920. And Wrangel is surrounded by a group of refugee Russian children, among them scouts, with a scout leader in the scout uniform. And first, I would like to quote a little something from a 1916 Russian scout pamphlet, quote, "Scouting cannot and ought to not have any objectives which could serve to drag the young souls of schoolboys into the whirlpool of passions, which is politics. Politics must not touch the youthful, still tender souls of school children." Tellingly, the accusation made against scouting by the communist regime, once it consolidated its power in 1923 and subsumed the scouts into the pioneer and Komsomol organizations, included the following accusations: that 1, scouting was committed to, quote, "a special world of childhood." 2, that it had an apolitical stance, that it was trying to keep the kids out of politics. And 3, that it pursued a conscious lack of attention to social class divisions. All of this, the new regime found intolerable. So after 1920, Pantukhoff was faced by exactly this conundrum. And could his strictly anti-utilitarian view of childhood and scouting be overtaken and tested by circumstances? By the end of the Russian Civil War, between 1920 and 1923, nearly 1 million Russians had become refugees, people without a country. And Pantukhoff had to rethink his vision of Russian scouting under these new circumstances, despite his original resistance to any political programs influencing scouting. In 1921, the Pantukhoffs emigrated to New York City. From the year 1924, the Russian Scout organization is known under the acronym NORS, the Национальная организация русских скаутов, the national organization of Russian Scouts, and it's headed by Pantukhoff until his death in 1973. Ironically, with this new situation, the difficulties in remaining apolitical become much greater. The preservationist agenda, which was one of the top priorities among the adults of Russia abroad, was intrinsically political, since its goal was to create a Russian alternative to the existing Soviet order. The following directive sent by Pantukhoff from New York City in 1924 underscores this point. Quote, having been torn away from their motherland, forced to rely on the hospitality of foreign states, scattered throughout the whole world, getting their education with rare exception in foreign schools, sorry. Nevertheless, our children still remain and must continue to remain Russian. And it is because of this that scouting among them must pursue more specific purposes besides its general goals, namely bringing them together into one common amicable Russian family, replacing for them, as far as possible, their homeland of which they are temporarily deprived. This represented a turn away from the original program adopted by Pantukhoff in 1909. Now it is no longer scouting for its own sake, but for the sake and for the sake of the children, but scouting for the sake of Russia, Russia as something separate and in opposition to the USSR. An entry from Pantukhoff's unpublished writing dated the 21st of October, 1922 is even more explicit. But we were totally unprepared for the collapse of Russia. What will become of her? Let us hope for the best and let us assist in building this better future. How? The scouting movement. This is probably the most certain, if not the quickest way. We must educate a new generation. Pantukhoff's maneuvering between the Scylla of immigré politics and the Charybdis of an apolitical stance is demonstrated in the document which every scout instructor in North France had to sign in the 1930s, promising not to disseminate personal political views among the scouts, while also asserting lack of any political sympathy or ties to the USSR. Many changes ensued after World War II. Which would lead to serious internal conflicts within the movement. In 1946, a new Russian scouting organization appeared in Munich, the Organization of Young Russian Scouts, ORUR. This was justified by citing the chaos of post-World War II Europe, which made communication with Pantukhoff in America difficult. Many of the scout leaders in the new ORUR organization, however, were also members of NTS, Национальный трудовой союз, the National Labor Union, or Solidaristy, which was an anti-Bolshevik conspiratorial Russian immigrant organization, which besides spreading anti-Soviet literature abroad and smuggling into the USSR, also sent young Russian emigres into the USSR to organize anti-communist resistance. Many of these secret agents perished between the 1930s and the 1950s. Russian scouts in France and in Great Britain remained in the Old Norse organization, but the children of Russian emigres fleeing the Red Army out of Central and Eastern Europe, as well as former Soviet citizens who found themselves in the West, joined the ORUR scouting organization, whose centers of activity revolved around the DP camps, the camps for displaced people run by the UN in Austria and Germany. Starting in January of 1953, attempts were made to reunite Norse and ORUR. However, the political agenda proved to be an insurmountable stumbling block for Pantukhoff. I will cite only the last entry concerning this subject from his personal notebook for 1953, dated October 28th. As for the question of any sort of reconciliation, merging, unification, etc., between the Scouts and the NTS Solidaristi, it is time to bring this story to an end. Arur is not scouting. The party-informed attempt by the Solidaristi to influence Russian youth with its pernicious doctrine, filling their minds with propaganda and convincing them to work actively for who knows whose goal, in reality handing over our youth to the Soviet secret police. It's no accident that they never evinced any interest in the younger children, neither scouts nor girl guides, not to speak of the Cub Scouts. They needed more solid meat for their party school disguised as a scout camp. All negotiations between the two branches of the Russian Scouts abroad were suspended until 1970, when Norse and Arur finally reconciled. Pantukhoff's vision of an apolitical scouting movement eventually triumphed. In 1956, all Arur Scout leaders were encouraged to resign from NTS. Pantukhoff's conflict originated because Russian scouting abroad served two different and opposing purposes. Pantukhoff's original idea was to give children a childhood in the sense of an apolitical matrix for the development of the individual personality or lichnost. Yet historical circumstances intervened. The preservationist agenda, which lay at the heart of Russia abroad's vocation, was intrinsically political. Thus, Pantukhoff's dilemma. In the end, he chose his vision of childhood over politics. And here, in conclusion, we have, I labeled this slide continuity. First of all, again, the photo of Vera Konstantinovna, whose brother was a scout back in 1913 in the Tsarskoye Selo troop. And she is here attending the poor camp in Jackson, New Jersey. And here you have yours truly. At that time, I was Lisa Krzysztofowicz, and this is my sister, Vaida Barbara. I'm 12, she's 10, and we are members of the scout camp that Vera Konstantinovna used to visit every summer. And finally, here's my granddaughter, our granddaughter, Nikita's and mine, Zoya Zelenskaya, known as Zizi, with her friend Nina Reznikova. They are both Zaychiki, pre-Cub Scouts in the Arur camp in West Virginia. And again, to complete the circle, Nina Reznikova is the great-great-great-granddaughter of the last speaker of the Russian parliament, Mikhail Radzyanko. So with that, I finish my talk. Thank you very much for your attention.
So the first question is from Natalie, who says, a wonderful presentation, Dr. Zelensky. Have you written or published a book on this topic?
Well, actually, I have 2 articles that have been published on this topic, and I will include a little bibliography in a slide that we will post on the archive page so you can access them there.
Thank you. So as we're waiting for additional questions from the audience, I had a question that I wanted to ask, sort of 2 questions, I suppose. There was the Sokol movement. Was this part, the scouting movement, was this part of a larger movement that espoused these liberal values, which it seems the Sokoli did as well? And then how did this transform in the Soviet Union? We all know about the pioneers, the pioneri, which have these external trappings of the scouting movement. So could you comment a little bit about that and how that was transformed in Soviet Russia?
Thank you. Well, the Sokoli, actually, I'm going to look back through my notes or maybe even try to access the archive. Of course, now everything is much, much harder to do because we never thought that Russia would be close to us again, because I did a lot of this research in Moscow. The Sokol movement, I wonder if they were represented at that parade of children's organizations that Pantukhoff was writing about, in which he first introduced the scout movement to Russian public at large. So I don't know. The Sokol movement, of course, is older than the Scouts. And it did have a sort of a meta-political purpose, since it was an organization that was trying to unite all the Slavic young people together through this gymnastic society. And in that sense, with the pan-Slavic movement, the liberal, I don't know how liberal the circles were, but it's a very good question, and I will look into that. Okay, the difference between the Scout, the Soviet version of Scout-Wukhud, if we can call it that, the Komsomol and the Pioneri, and the Russian Scouts, well, I think the main, of course, Nadezhda Kurbskaya, the wife of Lenin, who actually was one of the instigators and designers of the pioneer movement, she used a lot of the Scout methodology. But I think the main difference, first of all, of course, if you look at the Scout laws, that the Scout is faithful to God and his parents and his country. Of course, the pioneers are not, because it's an atheistic organization. And also, and I think this is very important, and this is where we see one of the major ideological differences between Scouts and pioneers, and why Scouts had to be outlawed in the Soviet Union. A Scout is a friend to all and a brother to every other Scout. A pioneer is only a friend to working class children. And so this is, right there. The Pantukhoff tried from the very beginning to make his organization inclusive. And in fact, to break down the barriers to a common Russian identity that were rife in Russia before the revolution, again, as I said, through the legal status that was assigned to different social groups, such as the nobility and the peasantry. While the communist movement, of course, was interested ideologically in developing the children of peasants and workers, and no other children.
Thank you. So the next question comes from Nikolai, who writes, would you tell us a bit more about the request of the Arur leaders to resign from NTS? I did not know about this. Did anyone actually resign? I actually resigned from Arur because of the NTS fellows wanted to name our troop in honor of Vlasov, and I was not in favor.
Well, I know that the very founder of Arur in Austria, right after World War II, Martino Boris Borisovich resigned from NTS in 1956 and remained in the scouting, in the scouting movement. So I certainly know that, and I have written confirmation of that. Besides that, I think that's, I didn't really investigate the political proclivities of any of the older Scouts in the organization. But yeah, I think that the fact that Martino resigned is evidence that, the NTS connection was severed.
So here's sort of a follow-up question on that topic from Timur, who says, how quickly did liberal values of the Russian Scouts abroad were substituted by national or nationalistic goals? And if liberal values were evident in the Russian Scout movements abroad, even for a short time, in what form were these values expressed in the activities of the organizations?
I think that, first of all, the inclusive nature, right? It wasn't the Scout over the generations. Okay, when I was a Scout in Por in 1964, 1965, we had many Scouts, fellow Scouts, first of all, who were not Orthodox. They were Buddhist. Some of them were Jewish. Some of them were Lutheran, but they were all scouts. And we managed, when we had our religious lessons, the Zakon Boží, which we had to have in order to pass the scout examinations, right, to get a higher rank, the kids who weren't Orthodox had their own version of these exams. So that number one. Number two, again, we had various ethnic groups. It was Российские, it was the Russian imperial as a whole, not just Русские. We had a numerous Kalmyk component in our scout camp. We had some kids from some of the Caucasian nationalities, again, in our scout camp. So I think that all of this shows rather liberal proclivity. But again, the liberal, when I said that scouting is a liberal organization, it was liberal in the 19th century version of this. I'm not talking about 21st century liberalism or big government, or I'm not talking about any of that. And so I try not to be anachronistic during this discussion. But anyway, that is my experience in the poor camp. Maybe some people who went to Arur could also, join this conversation right now and tell us a little bit about in the 60s and 70s. Because right now, of course, in the 21st century, I think that most of our scout camps reflect a kind of a tolerant, not a chauvinistic vision of the preeminence of certain groups of people in Russia. Yeah, so that's all I can say about that.
So I think we will conclude with this question from an anonymous attendee who says, apart from the obvious link of the scout camps owing their existence outside of Russia to her, meaning to Vera Konstantinovna, does Princess Vera Konstantinovna's legacy in any way continue to play a role in scout life today? In the camp you attended, for example, is there anything done in her memory?
Unfortunately, the camp I attended ceased to exist when I was 17, because our main financial supporter, Prince Beloselsky died. And after that, my sister started going to a Norse camp, and I was already too old for camp. So I don't think so, but again, maybe some people who are more involved in the Norse movement could tell us a little more about that.
Well, we actually have one more question. How many Arur branches are there now in the United States? I did not know that there were branches of Arur in Russia.
Well, in the United States, I think there are 3 branches, right? In California, in upstate New York, and in West Virginia, right? Washington. Yeah, Washington, D.C. And yes, the Arur movement is quite widespread in Russia, and also scouting, but under other rubrics. But the main idea of scouting is there if the name Arur isn't.
Well, and I'm a sucker for any kind of archival questions, so I'm going to end on this one because this one's great, and this is something that I asked Dr. Zelensky during our conversation, our run-through of the presentation. So Ivan asks, where is the Pantukhoff archive kept, if it ever existed? And yes, it did exist because Dr. Zelensky had access to it, but I will let you answer that question.
It's a marvelous archive. Oleg Ivanovich kept very meticulous records of anything that he wrote, anything he typed, always in triplicate and very well organized. And when his son died, Oleg Olegovich Pantukhoff, his widow, Esther Bates, asked me to help her organize, put this archive into order. And after that, it was given to Alexei Zakharin, who was the head scout of the North American RUR, Russian Scout Organization at the time. And then it was slated to go to the Solzhenitsyn emigre library in Moscow. But before being sent to Moscow, it went to the Hoover Institution in Stanford in California, and Anatoly Shmilov did a marvelous job of digitalizing everything in that archive before it was sent to Russia. So now we still have the archive in California, and we're very, very lucky in that sense. And so many of the archives that we sent are now in Russia, and it'll be much, much harder for us in the immigration to access them.
Well, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation again. I'm thrilled that you shared this research with us of materials that were not accessible to very many people. Thank you to all of our attendees. Have a wonderful weekend, and I look forward to seeing you at our next lecture.